This time on Werner's Whirligigs, we're going to get our hands dirty trying to figure out how the motor in my first gen Cummins pickup truck suffered complete oil pressure loss. I'm talking zero. All right, let's get into it.
We're really going to cover a lot of ground in this video, so I've put together here a summary of the content so you can choose what you want to learn about. So first we're going to remove the oil pressure sensor, then we're going to test the oil pressure with a mechanical gauge, actually in two locations. We're going to remove and inspect the oil cooler assembly, which also includes the oil pressure relief valve and the oil filter bypass valve. And then we're going to inspect the oil pickup in the oil pan using a endoscope type camera. And then we're going to remove and inspect the oil pump, and that requires removing the fan and fan clutch assembly, the crankshaft vibration damper, the serpentine belt, and the timing chest cover.
I want you all to remember that I'm just another yokel who's not educated nor a professional in what I'm doing here, and it's possible that if you rely on this video, you, your project, or the both of you might end up as a smoldering hunk of hammered dog shit. Please use common sense, be careful, and always protect your ears, eyes, face, body, and hands when doing this type of work. With that, let's keep on trucking.
This video may contain peanuts.
Well, hey everyone, and welcome to Werner's Whirligigs, or welcome back if you've been here before. I'm Werner, and I'm going to start out with a story today. About a week ago, I was driving home in my 1993 Dodge W250, and it has the Cummins 12-valve motor. I was on the highway, and about a quarter mile from my exit, I looked down at the speedometer because I was frustrated that the car in front of me was only doing 50 miles an hour, and I noticed that the red oil pressure warning light was on. Now I thought about it for a half a second at most and shut the motor off, put it in neutral, and coasted that quarter mile until I got to the exit ramp, and then got off at the exit and found a good place to park. I couldn't do anything there. I looked at a few things, but nothing made sense, so I called a flatbed and got a tow home. The truck is now sitting in the driveway here, and we're going to jump in, get our hands dirty, and try to figure out why it's not showing any oil pressure on the gauge and why the red oil pressure warning light is on. So, only thing to it is to do it. Let's go. So in case you're not familiar with where the oil pressure sensor is on your Cummins 6VT, take a look in the camera. To the left you see the ignition pump, to the right you see the brake reservoir, you see the tube coming up from the intercooler. And if we start zooming in slowly, right behind the power steering reservoir and fill cap, on the side of the engine wall is the oil pressure sensor. Okay, now we're going to take off the oil pressure sensor. I am sure my arm is going to get in the way. I'll do my best not to. There's a clip. In this case, it's on the bottom. Pull this off. And then we're going to get a 1 1/16 inch socket. Jam it on there. Here we go. And then we're going to grab our socket wrench, our ratchet. And hopefully now I can get the rest out by hand. Yep. If you're interested, I made a separate video about bench testing that oil pressure sensor. All you need is some compressed air and a multimeter and a couple minutes of time. It's pretty easy. I'm going to put a link to it in the description below. So now what we're going to do is hook up a mechanical oil pressure tester gauge into the same port where I just removed the sensor. Looking down into the engine bay, and you can see that's where That's where the oil pressure test gauge plugs into the motor, and that's the same place where the sensor for the two readings on the dash are actually plugged into the engine. So we've got that set up. We've got a line coming up to here, and we've got a gauge sitting here ready to roll. So I'm going to go ahead and point the camera at the gauge and try cranking the motor without actually letting it fire. Excuse a little bit of parallax error. It's just hard to get the gauge to sit in the right spot with the camera, because I'm also using the camera to look at the reading, because I can't see it from where I'm sitting in the cab and film it. The fuel shutoff solenoid is disconnected, which means that the truck should not start. But I'm going to just crank it and see, do we get any building pressure? All right, the answer is no. Now I've hooked up the fuel shutoff solenoid, and so the engine should start. I pray that we see some oil pressure. Here we go. Nothing. Nothing. What in the what is going on? Our next challenge is going to be to remove the oil filter. I'm not sure what I might see. The manual says it can get clogged. I've never seen that before in my life, but you never know. So that's what I'm going to do, and then I'll join you again when I have it out. Well, I've got the oil filter here now, and yeah, it was about half, I would say, yeah, half empty when I pulled it off the truck. That's probably not a good sign. So what I'm going to do now is just drain it into my oil catch pan and see through a paper towel and just see if anything might show up in it. It's old oil, I know that. It's only got a couple thousand miles on it, but it's about time to change. It's been 15 months.
We're looking at what's left of the oil that was captured on the paper towel. This is the oil from the oil filter. And I don't really see much of anything, actually. I was worried that I might see metal flakes in here or some other sign of engine breakdown, but things look okay, I think.
Our next step is going to be to test oil pressure over at the oil filter head, or at the oil cooler. There's an extra port there for checking oil pressure, and that's what we're going to do right now. And here's that port I'm talking about sitting on top of the oil filter. That other line going out is the oil line to the turbo. And those who are astute or have x-ray eyes will notice there is no oil filter in there, and we don't need it. No, I'm kidding. I'm going to go and fill it back up. I took it off yesterday and it was half empty, which shouldn't be the case. So I'm going to go fill it all the way up, put it back on here, and then we're going to do one last try at checking the oil pressure. Got my specialized green workbench out here. I only use the green one when I'm working on the truck. And we're going to fill up the oil filter halfway, maybe a little bit more. Thing must hold, what, a liter? Okay, and since I am uncoordinated and unable to move that into the engine compartment without first making a mess, I'm going to use this squirt bottle here, and I'm going to fill it up with oil. And then you'll see what I do with it. So let's see if I can do this and you can see what I'm doing. I'm coming in underneath the alternator, And I have to tip the filter almost to 45 degrees to get it up. There we go. Okay, now here comes the test. Let's see if I can do this thing. I am going to attempt to turn this over and pour it in. Okay, I didn't spill a drop so far. All right, this method is a little too slow, but I'm going to stick with it because we're already here. I've ordered already some new squeeze bottles that will allow me to put fluid in a little bit faster. Oh, dang it. All right, well, there you saw it. Shit, crap. Good thing I have a tub and cardboard under the truck. Big Matt to the rescue. Now, instead of replacing that little port bolt, I'm going to plug in the adapter for the new oil pressure tester gauge that I got. I'm just going to do it finger tight. Yeah. This thing's kind of neat, and it wasn't expensive. It was a whole kit with 10 adapters, and it was $25. So you screw in the one you need, and it has a quick disconnect like an air hose. Okay, so I've been dragging my feet because I really don't want to do this. I don't want to run my engine without oil pressure, but for 8 seconds, at least it'll tell me anything else I need to know. I don't have a way to see the gauge and start the truck at the same time, so I'm going to film it, and I'm going to watch it afterwards and figure out whether we have pressure. So I'm jumping in the truck. I'm going to turn it on, count to 8, and then shut it off again, and hope for the best. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000, 6, 1,000, 7, 1,000, 8, 1,000. Well, I'm going to use the S instead of the F. Suck, suckity, suck, suck, suck. 0 oil pressure. My worst concerns were just realized. With this new horrible information about 0 oil pressure, we're not going to run the truck anymore at all. So next step is get under the truck and drain out the oil. And let's look and see what's in there. All right, we're under the truck now. I'm going to drain the oil, and I'm also going to try to take a sample just in a regular container, and then once I get some sample jugs, I'll send it in for analysis. This oil is cold, obviously, and black. Let me just grab some now. I do see something starting to swirl, but that might just be air bubbles. Now they're gone. Oh, I've got a magnet. I mean, to be honest, there's stuff on here, but I can't feel anything. It's like there's no grit at all. It just looks more like a little bit of sludge or something, and nothing metallic. There's nothing that's sticking to the magnet. So anyways, we're just going to let this drain for a while until it's mostly empty. The oil pan's mostly drained. This little drip isn't going to get in the way, so we can start feeding this borescope up into the motor. Up into the oil pan, so we can see what's going on.
As I tried to look around the oil pan, There was a mismatch between the camera's focus and where the light was being cast. I was confused, but then I saw the pickup screen, and I tried to make my way towards it. I thought I could understand what I was seeing. I turned on the side camera, and everything was clear and golden. But then I lost control. The colors were moving, and I didn't know where I was anymore. What was this place? Was I really in the oil pan?
This is the center of the universe right now. That's what it feels like.
Oh my.
It's the oil pump.
Using the borescope up in the oil pan was a bust. I couldn't really see much of anything. Maybe I recognized the oil pickup, but I don't know about that. So we're going to just keep going upstream. The next step we're going to take is we're going to remove the oil cooler, which is right here. We've been working on it before. And the very first thing we need to do is drain the coolant from the system. So that's what we're going to do next. And of course, before we do anything, we're going to disconnect the battery, just to make sure we don't accidentally get shocked. We're under the truck and we're looking at the driver's side bottom of the radiator, and we need to turn this little petcock here in order to start draining the antifreeze. To be honest, I don't remember what happened last time. I almost feel like I didn't use this thing. Getting this to move right away was not easy. I had to just hit it with a wrench for a moment. But now I can just start turning it, and you see it's starting to give up some liquid. Well, unfortunately, the drain valve must be clogged on the inside because I was not able to get anything but a couple of drips out of there. So we're going to move on to a different place. The next thing we can do is go to the lowest place on the coolant system, which is this return line here that's going into to the right over here into the radiator. So that right now it's on the passenger side at the low end of the radiator. Now there is no way I'm going to be able to get that clamp down there. So instead, I'm going to go after this clamp here, where it goes into water pump, and I'm going to disconnect it there, and then it's just going to make a mess all over everything. All right, I'm coming in from a weird angle, but I think the camera can still see what I'm doing, kinda. So now I've got this clamp off. See, I moved the clamp back so it's sitting down here. And now it should be just a matter of loosening that hose and pulling it off. So what I'm going to do also is just heat up the rubber on this outlet here and on this hose and try to get it off that way. I was wasn't having any luck getting it to move on the fitting, and I'm thinking if I just put some heat on it, that might help out. The mess is just about to begin. Another thing I'm going to do is just take these clamps off that hold these water lines or coolant lines that run into the cab. This will help me. I won't take them off completely, the lines, but what I'll do is be able to move them out of the way a little bit more so that I can get easier access to the oil cooler. You know, while we're at it, let's also take this big air line off from the air filter to the turbo. That might end up making life a lot easier. How do I know that? Well, yesterday I spent an hour trying to get the oil pressure relief valve back into the hole, and it was a real pain in the butt. And that's when I went ahead and loosened those two lines here and wiggled this out of the way, because they were in the way of the oil return line. I'm sorry, the oil pressure relief valve. So I'm going to take those off with a 7/16 inch wrench and come back. Well, somehow my camera shut off while I was removing the oil line to the turbo, and it was heroic. It was one of the biggest knuckle busters ever, and I didn't yell, I didn't swear, I just sucked it up. So anyways, you know, you can see now there isn't a lot between us and this oil cooler, so I'm going to start taking it off. All right, we've got a decent amount of bolts to loosen up here, so let's just jump in and deal with it. Oddly, they're not very tight. I mean, I guess they're tight enough. Once upon a time, there were a lot of bolts, and it was really hard to get them all in the picture. So the Magic Prince took all the bolts out while the camera wasn't running. All right, we've got all but this top one off. And the reason that we don't have it off is because the fuel injector, the turbo oil line is in the way. So I had to remove all the other ones first, and then as I'm backing this one out, I can back this cover off, so it's all loose. So I'm going to do that and meet up with you again. Okay, so we got the cover off, which has the place for the oil filter, and also it has the oil pressure relief valve on the other side. And we'll inspect this more closely in a bit. And so now what's left in here in the confines is the oil cooler. And there are no bolts holding it in place, so I think I'm just going to pull it out. But once again, it's too cramped to get a camera in here while I do it. So just trust me, it's going to happen. And huzzah! We have the oil cooler. I actually had to make some bangy to get this guy out. He was all comfortable and didn't want to leave. And then here's what we have left in this cavity. If I were a more skilled photographer, I wouldn't have to do it funny, but there you go. We got all that out of the way, and now it's time to do some more inspecting. Now that we have the oil cooler assembly out of the engine, let's talk about what's going on here, what's important, what can be replaced, and let's see what we can learn from this one. So there's two main components, there are two pieces, I guess you might say. This is the cover, and we'll talk about that more in a second. We'll move on to the coolant part first, or oil cooler. There's a gasket between the two, and then this is the oil cooler here, the actual cooler. And this sits up against the side of the block like so, and this area here is submerged in coolant adjacent to where the cylinders are in the block. And how does this thing work? Well, you know, again, this mates up with the cover that has all the passages in it, but we have a port here. This is the port that leads in from the oil pump. Oil comes up to here and drops down into the cooler, makes its way through the cooler, which is again submerged in coolant, and then it comes out up here. Now from here it actually goes through the oil filter and then comes back out and finds its way back down to this port here, which leads to the motor, the internals of the engine. This port here is a second drain area, and this drain, I guess, is if there's any internal leaks, but also if the oil pressure relief valve is activated, this is where the oil would go from that and drain back to the engine oil pan. Now we're going to take a look at the oil cooler cover, and there's actually a lot more going on in this cover than there is in the cooler itself. So first we have the filter head. This is where you screw in your oil filter. We have a port here. This is where you can hook up your oil pressure tester gauge if you like, or maybe a permanent gauge. This is the port that leads to the oil line to the turbo. And then right here, we have the outside of the oil pressure relief valve. And there's this spring here, and then there's a cylinder or a piston on the other side, which we can see. And I'll explain how that functions. There's a lot going on in this piece. We'll tackle it one by one. Just name what's in here first. This is the oil filter bypass valve. This here is the inside of the oil pressure relief valve. I think the best thing to do might be just to discuss the path of the oil. So oil comes in through the port on the cooler here and starts traveling up this line. Now this cylinder here, which is part of the oil pressure relief valve, is hollow to a point, and then there's a series of holes right here. So if the oil pressure in the system is high enough to cause this to ride up, oil then can go through the center of the piston and come out at this point here. And from there, it's going to wind its way back down to the bottom and exit through the lowest port over on the oil cooler and go back to the oil pan. Now, there's a couple things that can go wrong here. You can have a spring that is too weak, and that would cause this thing to rise up more often and send the oil back down to the oil pan instead of sending it on to the rest of the system. So that would be a low oil pressure condition. Another thing that can happen is that this piston can get seized up here like this. I guess it could also get seized down here like this, but either way, if it gets seized, that's not a good thing because it's not working correctly. If it gets seized in the up position here, then oil will keep going back to the oil pan, and that'll cause lower oil pressure in your system. Now, assuming that everything's okay here, oil would leave through this area here, and it would go over to the oil cooler and run through the cooling channels before coming back into the cover up here. And then this port down here leads to the exterior of the oil filter, so it goes down through the filter and comes back up through the center. It's coming in on the outside through this hole, and then it exits through the center here and comes back over to here and finally runs down to the exit. And this is where oil continues on to the internals of the engine and some other places that it needs to go. Now, this oil filter bypass valve can be triggered if there's too much pressure in this part of the system, and it's a simple spring driven thing. If oil pressure is high, it pushes this down, oil flows through here, comes out this little port, and continues here. Now that theoretically shouldn't lower your overall oil pressure because it's still moving oil in the pressurized part of the system, but you should still check this thing and make sure it's working okay, because you really do want oil to go through the filter before proceeding on to the rest of the motor. And both the bypass valve and the pressure relief valve are serviceable. You have to remove this. I'm not sure how you would. I know I could do it, but you probably have to put in some kind of a puller or drill it out. I'm not sure. And then this thing just comes out on the exterior. You've got the spring and the piston here, and all these parts are serviceable. And then of course you have the filter here, which is obviously serviceable as well. So you just want to make sure that these two valves are working correctly and that everything in here is clean. All right, here we have the oil cooler, and the manual says that in addition to being able to pass oil through it, it also needs to be able to hold up to 70 psi. So we're going to do two simple tests. First, we're just going to put another cork in it, or another stopper with a hole in it, and just make sure air is getting through. No problem there. And the second test is to see whether it holds 70 psi. Now I have the regulator on my compressor turned to 70 psi, so I'm just going to crank it and see what happens. Okay, in the spirit of leaving no stone unturned, let's just make sure that the filter is allowing passage of air. I have this rubber cork here, stopper, that I drilled a hole through, and I'm going to put it here in the center. Now oil in this filter, and in any filter, will go in through this holes on the outside, go through the filter medium material, and then come up through the center before carrying on to the engine. I'm going to run it in reverse because I have no way to send air down 8 of these holes, but I can do it this way. Okay, yeah, it seems to be working just fine, so that's not the problem. Now I'm going to do a little air pressure testing on the lines that lead into and out of the oil cooler. So that big cavity is where the cooler part of the system goes, and that area inside of there going around the pistons, it has coolant in it usually. But we're curious about where the oil is, and so if we look towards the bottom of the pass of the oil cooler here, you can see there's these 3 holes. The highest one on the right goes back down to the oil pump. The one next to it on the left, that's just a little bit lower, goes into the core of the engine and distributes oil along the different cylinders. And the one at the very bottom is just a drain hole, and I believe the only way oil would make it down to that one is if the oil pressure relief valve gets triggered. Oil would go in that direction and end up back down there at that drain. So what I'm going to try to do now is use my air gun and put it at a low PSI, like 25, and just send air down them and see what happens. See if one of them is blocked. See if when I send it down to the oil pump, do I hear it coming out of the oil pan in the bottom? I don't know, but it's not necessarily a conclusive test unless we find a line that's blocked. So I'm just going to put this in there, see what happens. So I can see the liquid in the drain dancing a little bit. How about this one? I'm going to go and remove the drain pan plug and see if I can hear any air rushing out of that. All right, I had jumped the drain pan, drain bolt. Let's see. Okay, I mean, it seems like there isn't a serious clog anywhere down there. So what does all that mean? Running the air through the lines tells me right now that there isn't any clog anywhere in the system. The oil cooler seems to be working fine. The oil filter relief valve is okay. The oil pressure overflow valve doesn't seem to be a problem, but if it were having problems, we would see slightly lower oil pressure, not 0 oil pressure, and it's closing and seating well. So I can't imagine that the issue is there. Air is able to leave the oil cooler and travel into the engine block, and there's no restrictions going that way. Air is able to travel down the drain in the oil cooler back into the sump, into the oil pan. That wouldn't matter for pressurizing the system, but there's no clog there. And then sending oil down sending air down towards the oil pump, that's working just fine too. The air's making it past the oil pump and down into the engine oil pan. So we're running out of options here. Oil pump is next. All right, we're gonna start taking this baby apart. So one of the first things we'll do here is get rid of the upper radiator hose. I've already drained the coolant earlier, so we don't have to worry about coolant going everywhere. Although there still could be a little bit left in the system. So we're just going to grab this clamp here and do our best to walk it off. There we go. And then their second one is down here. There we go. All right, we'll pull this one off first, and then take this one next. Now, you've been off in the last year, so you don't have to behave like this. There we go. All right, that's it. All right, so we're back with a 16 millimeter wrench on this nut here. Okay, that's off. All right, now that we have that bracket undone, we can just unscrew the filler neck, and then we're just left with a piece down here. And we can use, I'm going to use this wrench here just to rotate it around. It's not easy, so you just need a little bit of leverage just to get it down to a point where it comes out. There we go. Okay, there we go. So this is out. We want to take out the fan and the fan shroud now, which are here, but before we do that we need to remove the serpentine belt. So we'll move over a little bit more towards the passenger side, over here by where the alternator is. There we go. And you can see my wrench down here. And so we're going, here's the alternator, and here is the tensioner. And at the very bottom of the tensioner, there is a square hole, and that's where you're supposed to grab it. You put a 3/8 inch socket into there, and you turn it counterclockwise like you're doing lefty-loosey, and you push down on that, and it takes the tension off the belt. If I didn't have to reach around this goofy camera, wow, it would have been easier. But that's what you need to do, and then you can unwind the belt from in there at some point. Right now I just wanted to get it off so we can get the fan out of there. Next thing we just want to remove this plug here. This leads down to the crankshaft position sensor, and it gets wrapped around the fan clutch housing. So we'll leave it in here for now, but we'll eventually have to take it out. 1, 2. There's a third one down here, and the fourth one is down here, which is barely, there it is, you can see it now. There's too high and too low. The top two you can't take out with a socket wrench. Unfortunately, the bottom two you have to do with a open or closed end wrench, and it's kind of a pain in the butt. I take out the top two most of the way, but leave them in there to support it, and then I take out the bottom ones, but I don't believe they come out all the way. I can't remember, so we'll see what happens. Also, let me just say, I recommend you put a blanket or a towel or something over your front grille, because you're going to be leaning on it just to protect it while you're working up here. Okay, so we'll start with these top two. Get them loose. Now you can, there's a a reverse threaded nut here where the fan blade and clutch actually screw into this. I'm sorry, where the fan screws into the clutch. However, it's reverse threaded, and I have been unable to get it undone. I've seen folks do it by using some kind of an impact driver on the nut, driving it in the right direction, but I don't have that kind of tool. I have impact drivers, but you need like something with like a hammer, almost. It's more like a hammer, that so you can you know, bang that thing in the reverse direction, like you put like a little chisel head or a drift on, and then tut, 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 in the opposite direction than you would expect for that nut to loosen, and sometimes it'll break free. Now I'm going to go after the lower nuts with my 10-inch open end wrench. All right, you can see it, I got it way down in there, and you know, this was just a real pain in the butt. I guess it could be worse. And then this other one over here, we can kind of come at it. Ow! Oh my God, that hurt. That was a big knuckle buster. Actually, it was worse. It was a fingertip buster. All right, you get the idea. I'm going to remove these 4 bolts, and then I'll lift this thing out of here with the fan shroud. So now the top 2 screws I've taken out completely. The bottom 2 stay in the fan clutch assembly because they can't escape. They're captive. So then what we need to do is lift out the fan assembly and the fan shroud at the same time. And also, I set aside this wire that goes down to the crankshaft position sensor. And once the fan is out, you know, these 2 bolts can actually escape. Maybe even these 2. I'm not sure. But anyway, the way they're sitting there inside of the engine bay, they can't be backed out all the way. But once you get them out, they will fall out. So keep track of them. And now we can reach in here and lift out the belt. I'll zoom in on that. That's your crankshaft position sensor, and these pieces here give you the adjustability that you need to make sure that this thing is 50 thousandths away from the damper. All right, I'm going to start with the 2 13mm nuts on the position sensor. Just get these started, and then hopefully I can just take them off by hand. Now those nuts are off, we can just take the crankshaft position sensor off. It comes out with its harness, and we'll take these 2 posts off of here as well. And then these are going to be 10mm. And yeah, I guess before we really start taking off the 10mm nuts, let's loosen up the crankshaft damper. All right, to get the damper off, there are 3 nuts that you can hit with either a 5/8 or a 15mm wrench. And now that we've got the 4 bolts out, and yes, there's 4, not 3, then this thing should just walk itself off pretty easily. Oh, yes. And those observant might notice I put a line up there. There's nothing in the manual that says you need to do this and put it on the same way, but might as well. Over here on the right side, you do want to remove this spring that goes to the injection pump. You just set that aside, and we'll hold on to this clip. And the last thing we're going to do is just take off a bunch of 10mm bolts. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and more. So tell you what, I'll come back once I have this off and I'm ready to remove the cover. Okay, here's what looks like now. All the bolts are removed. Look at how many bolts there were holding in this cover. last time I did this, I said, you know, I really should get an electric ratchet just because there's so many here. And I put it all back together without one because I had to do it and I didn't have one handy. And thought, well, you know, I'm probably never going to do this again. And here I am. Before you start this job, go get yourself an electric ratchet if you don't already have one, because there are so many bolts here and you're going to be leaning over the engine for a half an hour taking all these out. So now the only thing holding on this cover is the seal down by the crankshaft at the bottom left, down there. So we can just walk this thing off very easily. And that's what we have left. And check it out. There they are, all the different gears. And I think this gear and the one next to it on the left are the oil pressure gears. Yeah, those are the oil pump. And what the heck happened here? Look at that. Do you see how, look how, these should all be flush together. Look how far back this one is. Look how far this one's sticking out. This one is kind of doing its own thing. Oh my gosh. Oh, wow. That is, that's messed up. Oh gosh. Okay, well, I'm going to have to inspect the other gears, like the one on the crank and the cam and the one that times the fuel injection pump also, just to make sure that this contagion hasn't spread. But that looks like it might be our answer. All right, here's another video looking down at from the top. And so there's the main crooked gear, which is, oh, I don't know, let's get it into the center of the picture. Now it's in the center of the picture. And to the left is yet another gear, and you can see how far off those two are from being flush with one another, let alone the other two. I don't think that gear in the center is supposed to mate with the one to the right, only with the one below it, which would be the crank. Are there any Watch Wes work fans here? Yeah, I'm a big fan. He's funny and he's smart as crap. Anyways, this is the point in the story where he would say, well, here's your problem, lady. Look at that. Holy moly. A clean snap. And that is where this other gear sits for the oil pump. So then this one meshes up to the gear on the crank. So the reason that this thing was so crooked like this is because it didn't have any support down here. Now, I don't know what caused this. Thankfully, I found this piece and it wasn't distributed to some other part of the timing chest breaking other gears. But I'm going to have to look into that a little bit more to figure out how this could have occurred. This bolt may have been loose. I'm not completely sure. I took out these three first and then mistakenly took out another bolt over here. You can't really see what you're doing. So I was just doing it by my feeling my way around, and I couldn't get it out. But I hadn't touched this bolt yet, and this thing was wiggling like this. You know, if this bolt had been tight, I don't think that would have been possible. So that may have contributed to it somehow. One scenario I can think of is that a piece of metal would somehow come up here and get wedged, and as this thing is turning, it's going to push these apart, and that could break this out. This is where we're going to stop the procedure for this line of thinking, and we're going to do a little more fact-finding and make a plan for the repair in the next video. Well, this is the sad part of the story where we end. I'm sure you'll be all right without me, but I don't know if I'll be okay without you. thank you so much for sticking around this long if you did. I really appreciate it, and I always enjoy your company. I also wanted to say thank you to whoever is buying things on Amazon with my links. Believe me, I don't make much money. I think since I've been doing that, the total has been $2.40, and that's over, I don't know, that's probably over 10 different purchases. So they don't give you very much, but still, I appreciate it. It was cool to see it work. So thank you, whoever did that. As I mentioned earlier, I still have some work to do on this to figure out what the plan is, and so I'll be circling back to try to take care of those things in the very near future. I also want to get back to work on those vices and on the surface grinder. And I also am going to try to do a better job of looking at the camera when I talk. I think when I start talking and maybe rambling, I start looking off because I have trouble focusing on the camera and thinking at the same time. I think that's called a personal problem. All right, well, again, thank you so much. Give me a like or a thumbs up. Subscribe if you are interested in hearing from me more. And we'll see you the next time. So long for now.